Hello, one and all, and welcome to the latest in AQR's Hub webinars. Without further ado, I will pass on to Simon. I will garner any questions along the way, but I will disappear for the moment, and I look forward to this session.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simon Paddison, chair of the judging panel, and today we're going to hear a fantastic case study about our use of water, presented by Tom Clarkson, research director of Blue Marble, and Ana Maria Millan from the Consumer Council for Water, or CCW. And they were highly commended in last year's award. And just to remind everyone that the AQR Qualitative Excellence Award was launched in 2003, and it's really the UK's sort of premier qualitative research award in this country, but also wider. And it recognises the incredible contribution that qualitative research makes to industry, to social issues, and so on. And the important thing to say also is that it's very tightly judged, and we have representatives from AURA, from the MRS, from SMR, from the APG, and from AMSAR, and often also academia. So it's a prestigious prize, and these are prestigious, highly commended performers. And so we're really pleased to welcome Tom and Anna to here to tell us their story. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Simon. So I'm just going to share my slides, and hopefully they'll come through okay. What we're going to do today is talk to you for about 25 minutes or so about the project that we ran last year, and explain to you why it was innovative and what we learned, which has been used by the wider water sector. The first thing I'm going to do is show you a short video, which is about 5 minutes long, which really summarises the research and hopefully brings it to life for you. And then Anna's going to come in and talk through the context and why CCW commissioned this project and what they were looking to achieve before I talk through what we actually did. So first step is to show you this video. I hope this worked. It's always worked in previous presentations, but if it doesn't, we'll find an alternative. So here we go.
CCW worked with independent market research agency Blue Marble to conduct an innovative and industry-first project. We installed video cameras next to the kitchen sinks of 15 households in England and Wales to observe their household's kitchen sink behaviour over a period of 7 days. A key objective was to explore the difference between what people say they do and what they actually do in terms of their water use and disposal of fats, oils and grease. We observed a vast array of behaviours, which varied greatly between individuals and households. Individuals were also inconsistent, displaying a mix of efficient and wasteful behaviours across and even within specific individual activities. As expected, there is significant discrepancy between what consumers tell us and what they actually do at the kitchen sink. Although this study was small, it shows that relying solely on self-reported survey-style data is not enough for understanding behaviour accurately.
Chicken's about the biggest one that produces any fat. Depending on how much there was, so I'd put it into the food waste bin, or if not,
yeah, because you'd let it go solid and then scrape it out and put it in a food bin.
So I'm filling the bowl up, and oh yeah, I'm getting rid of the dirt chicken stuff.
Oh, you've been putting that in my bowl.
And there are 4 main reasons why the participants from this study found it challenging to accurately recall their household's kitchen sink behaviour. These are the frequency of the behaviour. The more frequent the behaviour, the harder it is to recall accurately. The household dynamic, where participants are not privy to the behaviours of other household members. This is especially true for people in house shares and families. The working patterns of people in the household. Those working away from home tend to have fewer kitchen sink moments, so these are easier to recall, with many putting a positive spin on how they behave, and are often reluctant to admit to doing things they know they shouldn't. In addition to this, most are unable to quantify how much water they use, and find it difficult to estimate how much specific behaviours use in litres.
I don't even know how many litres are used in a shower, so I don't know.
So I don't know how much a shower uses, but I have to shower every day. Well, in gallons, it'd be about...
Well, that's 1.5 litres.
Oh, right, 8.
And then you have a bit for your cups of tea and everything, so like about 10 litres.
10 litres.
And there are many misconceptions about good and bad kitchen sink behaviour. For example, how to dispose of fat, oils and grease.
I'd rinse it in hot water down the sink and then wash it in the washing up bowl. Probably to rinse the majority of the oil off so it doesn't go into the bowl when I'm washing it. So I'm not washing it in oily water.
The soap, I think, acts like a catalyst to break the oil down a little bit so it doesn't clog up. But I normally just rinse it out in soapy water and then throw it down the sink.
Many do not know that water is not abundant in many parts of England and Wales, and that everyone needs to use water more efficiently to ensure there is enough for everyone now and in the future.
I don't understand why we'd be getting a big increase in water demand.
Because water is something like a natural source, isn't it? And it's not, I don't ever see water running out.
Based on the findings from this research, there are various implications for the water sector and those that work within it. Water sector communications could do more to help change behaviour, potentially by focusing on the following. Link water use with the wider climate change narrative, educating consumers about why water efficiency is important for the UK. Help consumers quantify and understand their usage, and bring to life in more tangible ways how much they use. Focus on a small number of water-efficient kitchen sink behaviours, and provide simple tips for helping consumers to change behaviour. Take advantage of common teachable moments in consumers' lives to connect with them. For example, moving out of home or living with others for the first time. Remind consumers what the consequences are of pouring fats, oils and greases down the drain. Myth bust by educating around key misconceptions. The water sector must no longer rely solely on self-reported behaviour, because there is a clear discrepancy between what people think they do and what they actually do. With the urgent need to reduce personal water use, it's going to be essential to make people more aware of their behaviour and its impact on the environment. The sector needs to encourage consumers to adopt better habits, now and for the future.
So there we go. I hope that was an interesting and sort of useful introduction to the research. I'm going to hand over to Anna now. I'm just going to reshare my slides and then hand over to her to talk through the context of the research and why we did what we did. So Anna, I'll pass on to you while I just share the slides.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everybody. So I work at the Consumer Council for Water. We're the independent consumer body for the water industry in England and Wales. So we basically represent customers and consumers' interests across water companies. And our research is a really important part of the work that we do, because we use that as evidence to influence our regulators, government, companies, and to understand how people behave and ways in which we can help them change those behaviors. So in the water sector, we wanted to really try and think about different ways in understanding how water-related behavior takes place at home. So in the water sector, we broadly rely on self-reported and service-style data for understanding how people behave with and around water. But as was mentioned in the video, and as you probably know, what people say they do can be very different to what they actually do. And this is very important for the water sector, where water use is often subconscious and private, making it even harder for people to record and self-report their behavior. We wanted to show how close observation can provide insight on actual behaviors, highlighting where existing self-reported data may be inaccurate. And as far as we know, the water sector had never used this type of method to understand how people use water at home. Next slide, please. We wanted to observe how people behave at the kitchen sink and see how they use water and how they dispose of fat, oils, and greases, or fogs, as we tend to refer to these things. Specifically, we wanted to validate or challenge existing evidence on self-reported behavior and try and assess the difference between record and actual behavior. We also wanted to observe through filming the behavior at the kitchen sink, and we thought that was a really important part of the work, to be able to see people in real time using the kitchen sink. Also, we wanted to explore whether water use had changed during the pandemic, and finally evaluate the water sector's current advice and communications. I'll pass over now to Tom.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks very much. So yeah, this is where I'll come in and talk through what we actually did then from a research perspective. So we recruited 15 households around England and Wales, all sorts of shapes and sizes of households, which we'll come on to in a little bit. And we recruited them to observe their behaviour for a period of about a week or so. The first step was actually to understand which technology we wanted to use. There are lots of different video options available, lots of different cameras you can use on lots of different apps, all with different advantages and disadvantages. So actually, as a Blue Marble team, we all tried quite a few different cameras out in our own homes for quite a few weeks before we started the project, to understand which one was best for our needs. And then we recruited a pilot household, and we took them through our whole process to check it was working and to check it would deliver what we wanted from the research. And then once we were happy that the pilot was successful and we made a few tweaks to our approach, we then ran through the whole process with 14 further households. As you can see from the slide there, that our fieldwork period last year was actually during national lockdowns in England and Wales. There are probably 2 points to make around that. The first one is that people's patterns were often a bit different from what they normally would have been. Obviously, people in general were spending more time at home than they might have done. But particularly important was working patterns around the pandemic. So we wanted to recruit a mix of people who were working at home and out of home as well. So that was one of our recruitment criteria, was to ensure we had a good mix there of people who are leaving the home to go to a workplace, and people who were working at home, as well as those who were at home for other reasons, whether they retired, unemployed, students, and so on. And then this was our approach. So we started off with a literature review, really to understand what was already known in the water sector, and what in particular was known about behaviour in the kitchen. And then we recruited that pilot household and took them through our process to check it was working. And then we took the remaining 14 households through the whole process, which followed a number of steps here. So the first one, as you can see in step 3 there, was set up. So we conducted a Zoom interview with each household at the outset of the project. We'd already posted them cameras and sent them instructions on how to set these up and where to set them up around the kitchen. And that Zoom interview was really serving 2 purposes. Firstly, to warm them up and check that they were sort of comfortable with the research and what we were asking them to do, and comfortable with us as researchers, and all at ease, and also to help us understand a bit more about their household and the dynamics. But also to check that the technology was working, and we used that Zoom interview to make some tweaks and ask them to move the camera around a little bit, check everything was working from a video perspective, and so on. And then we left them to it. We usually left them to it for about 2 weeks or so, 10 days to 2 weeks. And actually, although the video was on for the first few days, and we were checking in to check everything was working as planned, we disregarded the footage from the first 3 days of the observation period. Basically, our hypothesis being that this is when behaviour would be kind of most atypical, as people got used to the idea that there was a camera next to their kitchen sink. So we didn't actually use that for the purposes of our analysis. All the way through the fieldwork process, and then at the end of that period, we were observing the videos and analysing them as well. So we coded the video data we were collecting to record things like how long the kitchen tap was running for, how many times people did the washing up, and so on. And then at the end of the process, we conducted another Zoom interview with each household. And there were really 3 steps to this interview. So the first one was to ask a series of survey-style questions in the way that the water sector does all the time, about things like how many times a day they did the washing up, how long they thought the tap was running for. And we compared those to the observed data that we had recorded and coded through the study to see how accurate people were able to be about their own behaviour during that period. Then we showed people some videos of specific behaviours of interest, and you saw some of those in the film. So often this was things like washing up technique, or where we'd seen people pouring things down the sink, as you saw with the chicken juice there. And we asked people to talk us through what they'd done and why they'd done it. And this was to understand the rationale behind certain behaviours, and also to try and explore whether people were actually consciously aware of these behaviours too. And we'll come back to that point in a minute. And finally, then we delivered the report and the film at the end of the project. And it's worth saying that even though this was a very small sample, so we only had 15 households, we did see a huge variation in behaviours across our sample. So just looking at a few of the points that we were recording here, just the number of times that a household used the kitchen sink tap. In one household who were at home all the time and actually very kind of preoccupied with cleanliness and keeping their kitchen clean. The average number of times they used the kitchen tap a day was 58, compared to another household where it was an 80-year-old man living alone who had carers who came in and cooked his meals for him. He actually only used the kitchen tap twice a day on average to fill up a big jug of water, which he then worked his way through during the day. Likewise, that same household did the washing up 28 different times a day on average across our fieldwork period, compared to a different household where it was a young couple. They were both working away from home, and they would leave all their washing up until 7 o'clock in the evening, and then they would do all the washing up at once a day, and anything that would then accumulate for the rest of the 24-hour period until the next day they do it again. And you can see some other figures there, just showing a huge array of behaviours that we saw across that very small sample. And there were a few observations that we could make about the factors affecting recall and accuracy of recall. So those survey style questions that we asked, we compared them to the observed data from the video footage. And the first thing to say is the frequency of the behaviour, unsurprisingly, makes a difference to how accurate you can be. So where washing up is happening 28 times a day, or the kitchen tap is being used 58 times a day, unsurprisingly, it's hard to recall each individual instance accurately and be able to report on that. Whereas that couple who are only doing the washing up once a day, it's quite easy for them. They know they do it once a day, and they don't have lots of instances to recall and try and put a figure on. Household composition was also very important. So we recruited a range of different types of household, including shared households, so student households sometimes, or groups of friends, and also larger multi-generational households, sometimes with teenage kids or adult kids. And in those contexts particularly, people aren't always privy to what's going on in the rest of the household and others' behaviour. So the lead respondent who's answering those survey questions, as would happen in the water sector more broadly, wasn't able to give accurate answers that reflected the whole household. There wasn't that gatekeeper to the kitchen sink in the way there might be in a household with a couple of young children, for example. And working patterns, as I've already touched on, linking to that frequency point, people working away from home generally had fewer interactions with the kitchen sink in a given day, and they tended to find it easier to recount those and recall them. A couple of other observations. Firstly, as you saw in the video, people find it very difficult to quantify water usage. So people often don't know what specific volumes, like litres, actually mean in practice. And they don't know how much specific individual behaviours use in terms of water. And so this makes it very difficult for people to visualise how much they use in a day. And at one stage in the follow-up interview, we revealed to people that the average person uses 142 litres of water a day, and compared it to the estimate that they had given us earlier in that conversation. And people were generally shocked and surprised, and this sort of vastly outweighed the figures that they had given us when they were guessing this. And we recognise, of course, that the way we asked those survey style questions and the way that the industry asked them affect how accurate the responses would be as well. Different people interpret different things, different phrases in different ways. So what counts as a single washing up event, for instance, or what counts as using the kitchen sink? Different people saw those in different ways. It's also worth saying that people frequently misrepresented their own behaviour. So frequently people put a positive spin on what they'd done, or sort of gave us a generous account of why they'd done something. And actually it was only when we confronted them, as it were, with some video footage of specific behaviours that they either realised or admitted to kind of bad, in inverted commas, behaviours. So some people in our sample appeared genuinely shocked by some of the behaviours we showed them, highlighting how much of water usage in the kitchen is subconscious and not really thought about, it's just part of a daily routine. And other people became quite defensive or tried to rationalise their behaviour to us in those interviews and explain away why they had done something a certain way, particularly where that behaviour was bad, so something like pouring fat down a sink. And that obviously just highlights the value of observational approaches like this one. One of the things that CCW were particularly interested in was, as Anna said, disposal of fats, oils and greases down the sink. So this often causes those giant fatbergs that you see in the sewers of London, the ones that are as big as London buses, and other parts of the country as well. And we were interested in how people thought about this and whether they were consciously aware of their behaviour. So if we'd just gone on the reported behaviour, we would have thought that everyone was really very responsible and very conscious of this all the time. People generally told us they had a number of different ways in which they felt they were responsible. So perhaps that the types of oils or fats that they were using didn't include high volumes of fats, oils and greases, so things like low-fat spreads or low-fat oils. Also a belief that their own cleaning products and kitchen products, their own brand of washing up liquid, for instance, was very good at breaking that down, so actually to pour it down the sink was fine. All had specific strategies like pouring excess fat away into a little tub by the side of their hob, for instance. But actually what we saw on the video footage was that pretty much all of our households poured fats, oils and greases down the sink, and often in very large quantities, and a couple of our households in really quite strikingly large quantities. And you saw one of those examples on the film. So just again highlighting that value of observed behaviour. A broader lesson for the water sector more generally was around the sort of missing context for people, the lack of understanding about the idea that water is scarce in many parts of the UK. So as Anna said at the start, actually people don't really know that actually the UK is relatively dry, particularly in areas like the east of England and the southeast of England, and there isn't a lot of rainfall, relatively speaking, and not enough water for our needs. And it's likely that that's going to get more acute as we move through the coming years. And people generally think about the UK as a wet country where our weather's not great, and we're used to the idea that there's plenty of water around. So that is often surprising to people, and people were shocked when we explained this at the end of the study. And there's also very little understanding of the other environmental implications of using water. So for instance, the idea that water goes through a process and a journey from rivers and lakes to our homes and back again, and that requires energy, and also there's chemicals used in that process and so on. So generally speaking, you know, in the context of a world where consumers are increasingly aware of their environmental debate generally and their own environmental impact, water is largely absent from this, and people don't really think about water in the context of climate change. And what that means is that the water sector's communications can often fall flat. So people aren't aware of that context. They don't have that sense of urgency of the need to change behaviours and to change them now. They don't really understand how individuals can help and do their bit in this fight in the same way they perhaps can about plastics. And there's very little satisfaction or guilt about good, in inverted commas, or bad behaviours. People don't really know what counts as good and bad, and they certainly don't really see the consequences of good and bad behaviours in the way that they do with other areas of environmental issues. So I'm just going to play a short video here. This is about a 2-minute video, which really sums up this point about a lack of understanding. And you'll see here one of my colleagues interviewing people and asking them what they made about this.
How important do you think it is to reduce your water usage then?
I think it is important, but for what reason? I don't know. I don't watch the news. Like, I'm really not interested. This COVID has just completely put me off watching the news. I don't read books, I don't read articles, so I'm really not clued up in any of this thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be important, but for what reason? I can't tell you. There's always a good reason, but I don't know the reason. It's obviously like when you drive your car, obviously to reduce the carbon footprint, you know, go on your bike or, you know, share transport. There's always an explanation, but for water, I don't know. Maybe we don't want to run out. I don't know. I didn't think water could run out, but there we are.
And on the left-hand side, it says, please help water companies manage the big increase in demand for water. What does it mean by big increase in demand?
Well, why is there all of a sudden a big increase in demand? Is it not? Why isn't it? Why is it any different to how it's always been? I think that's what I would think if I saw that.
Yeah, the population continually grows, doesn't it? But yeah, I don't understand why we'd be getting a big increase in water demand.
And I think with water as well, because water is something like a natural source, isn't it? And it's not. I don't ever see water running out. You know, the sea's full of it. We've got however many floods we have over the country during the year.
But it needs processed.
Well, I know it needs process and everything, but in my head, I think, well, we're never going to run out of water. It's not like coal or, you know, it's not making it. Well, in my head, it's not making a dent to the environment as such. It's just maybe you're going to have more water plants.
Again.
So just to round up then, and before I hand back to Anna, just to explain how the research has been used, what this really emphasised for us and for CCW was the importance of a strategic long-term approach to communicating about water usage around the home. So kitchen sink water usage and probably other elements of water usage around the home is private, and there aren't that many social norms, there aren't that many touch points of other people's behaviour, which would provide that opportunity to change behaviours. And actually consumers' relationship with their own water usage and their own water companies are often quite distant. So people don't tend to read what comes with the water bill, which usually actually includes some helpful water saving tips. They don't necessarily look at their water meter or understand how this relates to their bill in the same way as they do with energy. And actually, because water is cheaper than energy, people don't really feel like there's a financial saving to be made there. And on the point about blockages and Fatbergs, people don't often really understand the importance of doing that, and often what's beyond the plug hole is a bit of a mystery to people. So it's really important for the water sector to explain why behaviour change is necessary and to help consumers understand how they can do their bit, as well as giving them the tips about specific behaviours and specific changes they can make to actually reduce their water usage. And perhaps most importantly, to deliver those kinds of messages over the long term, and maybe in slightly different ways to is happening at the moment. Maybe given that people don't tend to read what comes with the water bill, maybe it's about a large-scale advertising campaign, maybe nationwide, to really get those messages home to people. And to sum up how this research sort of provided learnings for the whole of the water sector, 3 points we've pulled out here, which by no means all of them, but it challenged assumptions that are deeply held within the water sector about the factors that affect water usage around the home. So the water sector models behaviour to try and understand future demand, and it largely relies on household size, both in terms of property size, but also in terms of the number of people in a household. And actually we found that in the kitchen, and we recognise the kitchen isn't the whole picture, but is certainly an important part of it. Actually your attitude towards cleaning and how clean you like to keep your kitchen and how clean you like to keep your dishes and crockery and so on is really important. And also your working status. So particularly now in a COVID context, the extent to which people are working from home makes a really big difference to how much water they're using at home, as well as how much time they're spending at home more broadly. And also kitchen size. So if you've got space to leave plates lying around till the end of the day, you're likely to use less water. But some people have very small kitchens, and actually staying on top of their washing up is an important part of making the kitchen feel usable and useful. So their water usage is generally higher. The gap between actual and reported behaviour is high, but it's particularly high among large households and shared households as well. And that's important for the water sector to know when it's thinking about modelling future behaviours. And finally, as I've just said, consumers have very limited understanding. There's that missing link of the link between water usage and climate change. And that's why communications aren't necessarily cutting through at the moment, why behaviour change is very hard to affect. So I'll hand over to Anna, who's just going to briefly talk about how the research has been used and what's happened since we did the project.
So as expected, the research generated lots of interest. On the day it was published, it was covered by the ITV National Evening News, which was great. And we also managed to have one of the couples that took part in the project to be interviewed during the news coverage. It was the couple where the man is tipping the kitchen fat into the sink, and they were great. So it was a really good way to bring the research to life. We also hosted a big industry event, very well attended, that included us and Blue Marble presenting, and lots of participation from water companies to see how and if they could take the findings of the research forward. Next slide, please. Also, the research has had longer term impact. Blue Marble recently worked with 5 water companies to try and follow up what we did in the kitchen sink, but to try and look at what people do in their garden. So that project took place last year during the summer months, and it also had lots of great insight as to how people use water in the garden. And again, it highlights differences between what people say they do and what they actually do. And also, Blue Marble has been in conversations with people in Australia to see how to replicate that research over there. And for us, it has also helped us think about how we present our research. As a matter of fact, in our upcoming sewer flooding research, we will be including videos of people who have been impacted by sewer flooding in their homes. We thought that giving people the chance to speak about their experiences would be more impactful. This research has also changed the way as to how we might view the results of survey-based research projects, and also the questions that we may want to ask and answer in the future. And as Tom mentioned, there is very low awareness amongst people between the connection of their actions in the environment. So for this reason, as part of our strategy, we are planning to lead an industry-wide program of work to raise awareness of the value of water and of the impact our actions have on the environment. So this is the last slide. Thank you very much. And now we'd love to take your questions.
So thank you very much, Tom and Anna. It's just a fascinating case study, I think, that really strikes a chord with all of us. It makes us all think, oh my goodness. And it's just brilliant. I think in the past, they've done this kind of thing with showers, but it was for the shower gel, not for the water. And it's just a fascinating story, I think. So yeah, thanks all very much indeed. And hand back to Luella.
It was a bit shocking more than anything else. I've got a few questions, but I think Liz Montgomery had one right bang in the middle of your presentation, Tom. And she was asking, had you included any households with dishwashers in the research?
Yes, I saw that question. Yeah, we did. Yeah, and actually one of the things we were particularly interested in was the differences between households with dishes and those dishwashers and those without. And that's something we've reported on in the full report. But broadly speaking, actually, we found that the presence of a dishwasher in the kitchen didn't actually make a massive difference to the amount of time that people were spending at the kitchen sink. As I said, those other factors did. And some households with dishwashers would be termed, that we were watching, would be termed very kind of water inefficient by the water sector, by Anna and her colleagues. And other households that didn't have a dishwasher was sort of the other way around, which is perhaps slightly counterintuitive, but very interesting.
So do dishwashers make a difference? I mean, if it's so finely balanced?
I think they do, if you use them correctly. If you follow the advice of using maybe the eco setting and making sure you have a full load in your dishwasher. And I think there's also a tendency for people to rinse before they put the dishes inside the dishwasher. And I think that might be a big misconception. I understand, I'm not an expert on dishwashers by any means, but I understand that modern dishwashers have sensors that can see how dirty the water is. So if you've cleaned your plates before you put them in, your dishwasher is not doing a great job because the sensors think that the dishes are cleaner than they actually are.
I think my main problem is one of visualization that I can't actually tell in my own head what my water intake is. We are due to be fitted with water meters. Have water meters made a big difference?
Not really. Or they do and they don't. So if you were to look at the industry data, when you compare the water use of metered households, it tends to be lower than the water use for unmetered households. But I think the key issue is how to engage people with the information supplied by the meters. Most customers only find out twice a year when they get their water bills. Some water companies have what is called a smart water meter, that that sends information about your water use constantly to the water company. And you may be able to see on an online portal how your water use changes every day. But then again, the issue is how to engage people with that information. Because it's great if it's there, but if you don't know that it's there, or you can't be asked to look at it, then there's no way to see where you can make improvements in your own water use.
So you were talking about an education campaign. My one problem with this might be, I mean, I'm very pro, but that there is a degree of cynicism about water companies and their reputation and why they're doing it. Having seen this, I'm sold, but you really need to have an education campaign to actually get the public on board if you're going to overcome this sort of cynicism. So when is it?
And you think you've touched a really interesting point, and it's that about the reputation. And there's lots of conversations around, who is that messenger, that it's independent. And, some people even talk about, can we have that David Attenborough plastic moment for water? Who is that messenger and what do we need to see to make that happen? So that's in part why we want to lead that industry-wide program of work. And one of the strands of work that we're looking at is education and seeing how we can raise that awareness and make people understand that their water use matters. And also, what they put down the drain and flush down the toilet also has an effect on the environment. And water companies are doing great work to engage with their customers. So, there's things happening, but maybe they're not as mainstream or as widely known as we'd like them to be.
And I think I would have a problem in terms of getting rid of fat. That I belong to Slimming World, unfortunately, and you do spray fat, and therefore you clean your non-stick utensils with kitchen paper. Now that contributes to landfill. So how do you balance off between using oil and using paper?
I don't know. But it's a really good point, because no matter how we do or we try to do good actions on one side, there might be a negative consequence, unintended one possibly, on the other side.
Yeah. Sorry, Simon, you put your hand up.
Yeah, no, I just had a question for Tom, actually. I was just wondering, when you look back at the footage with the consumers, can you tell us a little bit more about the reactions that they had? Because you mentioned there was this kind of surprise from them.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and one of my favourite elements of the study, I think, was these sort of goggle box type films that we ended up with. It was a real mixture. You obviously saw some in the film there, but I think one of perhaps the most interesting was when we showed people their washing up technique, basically, and asked them, to talk us through what they were doing and why they did what they were doing. Was the range of influences on your washing up technique. And actually, for some people, it was just something they had never really thought about, but maybe observed from their parents when they were growing up, and they'd kept that sort of technique with them all the way through. And there was one person in our sample who told us about the fact that she used to live in a very hot country where water is incredibly scarce, and she was really used to the idea of preserving water, and that suddenly her washing up technique made loads of sense. It was that sort of context of the fact that she used to live abroad and she wasn't just shaped by the sort of UK perspective. And then we also had sort of student households who were often learning off each other through the course of the study, and they'd been living together for a few months. and we heard complaints about, you know, one person's habit of never putting the plug in, or one person not using a bowl, and I'm trying to educate them on the value of a bowl. And it was that range of influences that I really enjoyed about the project.
Really interesting project. Any more questions? Because if not, we will draw this to a close. But thank you both very much. And I hope people come and watch this when it goes online.
I saw there is a question about whether or not households with meters were included in the survey, and whether or not that made a difference.
Oh, yes,
I think you might be best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, definitely. So again, this was something we factored into our recruitment criteria, and we wanted to include a certain proportion of households who had meters and a certain proportion who didn't. We also included some people who are on what's called social tariffs, which are basically sort of discounted water bills. And again, we were looking for differences across those different groups. And we've written about this in the full report, which is available online. But to sort of briefly summarize, we didn't see a massive difference, and we don't typically across lots of projects in the water sector on this. And this is partly to those points that Anna was talking about, that people don't really look at their water meter that much. They only get their bill twice a year. And also water is, for lots of people, relatively cheap compared to other utilities, and particularly energy and broadband, actually. And so that there isn't necessarily, from their perspective, a big financial saving to be made by reducing their water usage. I think there are exceptions to that, and that's in our report, but that's a brief summary there.
Thank you. Are there any more? Any more for any more? I don't think so. Thank you both very much. I do hope people come and look at it when it's on YouTube. A final bit of housekeeping for AQR. Tomorrow is the deadline for the Parker Prize. So if you have any young researchers who you think should be put forward for this, please go and have a look at AQR's website. In the meantime, thank you both very much.
Just a quick thing. Just first of all to say that this presentation is being featured next week at Quirks in the AQR curated session on Thursday at 10:45. So if anybody's going to Quirks, it will be live. I'm afraid, Anna, you can't make it, but Tom will be there. And also the entry for the 2022 Excellence Award will be open from July, and I'm sure Tom would encourage you all to take part. Would you like to say a few words, Tom, about what it feels like to take part in the award?
Yeah, we're very proud of being highly commended, and very proud of being recognised, and it's obviously a great and very prestigious award. And I was just saying to Simon before the start of the session that actually having been highly commended has been beneficial to us as an agency in terms of interest from clients in future work.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much.
That's it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.